And there's a BBC album and a cassette of the songs by Dennis O'Neill from his series, which has just been released.
This Friday on BBC Two, Acting, a new three-part series, explores performing techniques in various kinds of drama with 3 workshops, each with their own specialist. Simon Callow on acting in restoration comedy, Jonathan Miller on acting in opera, and first, Michael Caine on acting in movies.
I regard the theatre as an operation with a scalpel. I think movie acting is an operation with a laser, because it's so tiny and it's so small that half the time people say, I don't know what you're doing. And you say, wait till you see the rushes. And the other thing is you always cheat as much as you can. Always steal, but only steal from the best people. Because what you're seeing them do, they stole. And just before a love scene, just in case, because you don't know, in case anybody has sort of breath problems, I always go, shh, shh. And the actress says, what's that? I say, have a taste.
Michael Caine starts off the new series Acting this Friday at 9:30 on 2.
Stepping out in just over 5 minutes on BBC One will be Carolyn Pickles as Miss Bluebell in this week's episode about the founding of the famous lineup of showstoppers. And there'll be a few backstage stories told here on 2 at 10:25 in the last of our series, On Stage. Before that, we've a battle to be fought, redskins to be routed, and some troopers to be licked into shape. Who by? John Wayne, of course, in John Ford's masterly western, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. The RKO movie great next week stars Katharine Hepburn and Ginger Rogers as a couple of girls in a theatrical boarding house determined to make it on Broadway, but with different ideas on how to achieve it. The names of the other hard-bitten occupants of the house read like the RKO casting directory and include Lucille Ball, Eve Arden and Ann Miller, all out to sparkle in this adaptation of the famous play by George Kaufman and Edna Ferber, Stage Door, at 9:25 next Saturday night. Tomorrow's Kiwi Cinema presentation on 2 stars John Gielgud as John Middleton Murray, husband of the late Catherine Mansfield in Leave All Fair.
Dearest Bogey, all my manuscripts, notebooks, papers and letters I leave to you. Go through them one day, dear love.
It's beautifully done, Andre, most impressive. And now I hope that these new pieces will help everyone to understand her more completely.
John is drawn to his publisher's assistant, who strongly resembles Catherine, but she comes to reproach him for creating a distorted picture of his wife.
But what the hell has this man done?
You know, Mary, these are personal letters. You shouldn't have taken them away from the office.
John, she was no saint, she was real. She was funny, and she was tough and wise. And she cared about her writing, and her brother and her friends in New Zealand, and not just about you.
Leave All Fair, tomorrow's Kiwi Cinema presentation at 10:25 on BBC Two. In 25 minutes, there are highlights from the third day's play at Lord's, where the MCC are playing The Rest of the World. Before that, BBC Two joins those on stage for the last in this series of theatrical stories.
Indeed. Well, salutations, and thank you for dropping in on another session of Green Room Chit-Chat, tending to illustrate the idiosyncrasies and the insecurities of a life on stage. The combined experience of the cast assembled around me tonight totals very nearly 200 years. Who are they? Well, this polite young thing kicked off her career in Zigger-Zagger at the National Youth Theatre and later scored successes not just at the National Non-Youth Theatre, but in theatres from the Far East to the West End, and still managed to slip in the odd television situation comedy. Tonight she's giving us the real Paula Wilcox.
Hello.
Now, this little girl has been one of my favourite actresses ever since she was a little boy, which she was so often and so successfully in Children's Hour on the Wireless, Just part of a remarkable career that's lasted more than 65 years. And even when, and I hope she won't mind my saying this, she was down and out and one of Britain's best-known drunks, she won prizes for it. The creator of Edna, the Inebriate Woman, Patricia Hayes. When, in the television series I Didn't Know You Cared, it was revealed that this specialist in upper-crust smoothies and cricketing brigadiers had a genuine North Country accent, some of his admirers were distinctly mortified and surprised. And who played at the Old Vic with Katharine Hepburn and starred with Mary Martin in a Broadway musical? And the $64,000 question, who was Britain's first ever television quizmaster? Could it really have been Robin Bailey? Now, only so sensitive a young artiste as this, who studied piano at the Royal Academy of Music and Shakespeare in the open air at Regent's Park, could have emerged as Britain's most successful margarine salesman. Not to mention one of our most successful, popular and busy all-round entertainers, which is why I'm so delighted that he could come on down and join us tonight. Leslie Crowther.
Lovely.
Well, to begin at the beginning, some of us go back a little way. Auditions. Did you ever have to audition, Leslie, or did you just float into the theatre?
Oh, no. I had to audition fairly recently for The Price is Right. In fact, Joe Brown and I, as close as 2 years ago, actually had to audition. We both did pilot shows, and I narrowly won. He was bloody good, and it was frightening to see his pilot because it was excellent, but they chose me, and I've been very lucky.
So I remember once going to this audition, and there were a whole lot of girls there, and they were all singing numbers, and I stood there and sang one of the things that were saying, something about sunlight and sunshine, and got nowhere. And when I got home, my mother said to me, "How did you get on?" I said, "Well, I didn't do very well." And she said, "Were the others all good?" I said, "No, there was a girl there singing the most extraordinary song. It was, 'I'm dancing with tears in my eyes, 'cause the boy in my arms is a Jew.'" And I really thought that that was it.
That's wonderful, isn't it?
As I sang, "The sun has got his hat on, hip, 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 hooray." But it wasn't hooray for me, I'm afraid. I never really did any good at auditions. The only work I've ever got, really, is when somebody has fallen out and they've been desperate. And they've thought, who can we get? We've only got an hour and the thing's got to go on. Well, we better have her. And then I've had those chances, I've had those breaks. They come to you all, in all walks of life. Always be ready for the break when it comes, because, you know, you may not seem to be getting anywhere, but if you've got some talent, when the break comes, when the chance comes, you'll get there.
I don't have a long history of auditions. I started by bluffing my way in, and I've gone on that way ever since. But the plushest audition that I ever did was to do with the musical you referred to that I did on Broadway with Mary Martin. And I was here doing something I wasn't enjoying very much and wishing for the floor to open, or please God, let something nice happen. And it did. I was asked politely, would I mind flying to New York for the weekend to talk to Mary Martin about the possibility of doing this musical. And I didn't see why I should mind that at all. And I was met at the airport, chauffeured limousine, and driven to Mary's East Side, very plush apartment. And up there on the 12th floor in the apartment, immediately above Greta Garbo's, it was, I was ushered in, and the unmistakable voice of Mary Martin called out from upstairs, "Is that you, Daddy?" And I thought, what is this? Well, it was a brief mistake, and it was quickly put right. And the next day, Arthur Schwartz and Howard Dietz were invited over to play their songs for me. I couldn't believe any of this. And eventually, a day later, we went onto the stage of the Mark Hellinger Theatre to establish the fact that I might be able to hit a note here and there. And I quickly and very hesitantly said to Mary, and I think, you know, I've said this before, but I have to say it again. I wonder if you have got the right man, because I'm not a singer. And Mary very generously said, what are you worried about? Neither am I. Isn't that lovely?
Yes. A long time ago, when I very first started out, I didn't exactly audition, but I had to go and meet a director about a play, and it was about the first theatre play that I'd really been up for. And I had to go and meet this director in the offices of a company called Memorial Films that was run by Albert Finney and Michael Medwin. And we were in this very grand office in the middle of the West End, and the director was sitting over his borrowed desk, as it turned out, talking to me about this part and sort of really putting me through my paces. And I was trying to explain what I'd done. I'd done about 3 jobs, I think, up to then, and I was trying to make them sound really impressive and trying to make them sound like 33 jobs, you know. And it was all going sort of quite hopelessly sort of wrong, and I thought, oh God, I'm really not doing this terribly well. And the door opened in the middle of this discussion, and Albert Finney walked in. And I mean, I just kind of fainted, because I'd never seen anybody as grand as Albert Finney before in my life. And he strode in and said hello to the director, whom he obviously knew, and then said, hello, Paula, how are you? And he'd obviously looked up on the list of the actresses who were going in to be auditioned. And I said, no, fine, thank you. And he said, has she got the part then? And the director said, well, we're really talking about it, you know. And he said, well, I mean, is she a good actress? And the director said, well, yes, I mean, yeah. So he said, well, can she do it? And he said, well, yeah. So he said, well, she's got the part then, hasn't she? So I did actually get the part, and I'm sure that it was nothing whatever to do with my performance at the audition, but just that the director didn't have the guts after that to not give it me.
Or there may have been some other reason by the sound of it.
I've got the most fabulous memories of a great man called Robert Atkins, who ran the open-air theatre Regent's Park. And my favourite moment of all time, I think, about those early days, first of all, I was the third watchman in Much Ado About Nothing. And the other, my father came to see the show, turned round to buy a programme, turned back and missed my performance. I mean, completely gone. But I also played Thisbe, Flute the Bellows Mender, who becomes Thisbe in the play scene in Midsummer Night's Dream. And of course, in the open-air theatre in those days, it was indoors if wet, and indoors was a bloody great marquee next door. And sometimes the audience decided that we ought to go inside first, and sometimes the actors decided. Well, this had been mutually agreed by both parties on one occasion when it was persisting down. And we tore into this marquee. It didn't really make any difference because, of course, the sound of rain on the canvas made the actors totally inaudible. And we suddenly remembered we forgot to tell Robert. And Robert used to play canasta with his wife Ethel, and Robert had this wonderful voice. And he knew the part so well, he used to put his hand down and go and play the scene, go back and resume playing the thing. And we'd forgotten to tell him that we'd decided to resume the performance indoors. And I was deputed, as I was in those days, the youngest and most fleeted of foot, to dash back along these muddy duck boards like World War I trenches and tell Robert. And I arrived back just too late to prevent him going on stage to a totally empty auditorium with the rain pouring down, saying, "Oh, grim look night, oh night with you so black, oh night whichever art when day is not, oh Christ, where is everybody?"
But I'd like to tell a story of, it's because my mother, you see, my mother put me on the stage. I never decided to become an actress, and my mother used to regale me with wonderful performances that she'd seen in the old days. And in particular, she used to talk to me about Fred Terry and Julia Nielsen Terry and Fred Terry, this marvellous actor in this wonderful, wonderful play, The Scarlet Pimpernel. And my mother said to me, there's a marvellous scene in the middle of the play when Lady Blakeney, who is married to the Scarlet Pimpernel, Sir Percy Blakeney, and she doesn't know that he is the Scarlet Pimpernel. And he says he must go abroad again. She says, what, again? He says, yes, again. Oh, no, you see. And they have a quarrel, and he exits. And I'm going to stand up for this. And she's left alone on the stage. Now, this is acting. This is acting as it was in those days, as performed for me by my mother, and with absolute accuracy, because later on she took me to see the show. And it was true. She said, she's marvelous. She bends down like that, after he's gone, and she picks up this little red flower, and she says, "My husband